All right, hopefully you can let me know if you can't see my screen. This is the lymphatic system. So if you notice, it's in some ways it kind of follows where your blood vessels would go. So it's kind of like another system to carry things around your body. It's another system with fluid flowing through it. So to transport things around the body, you can get things around through your blood or lymphatic. It just depends on what it is, right? But it kind of follows, like you have going up the neck, you have going around the shoulders. You've got like these big ones along where the aorta and vena cava is. Splits down here at the ilium and goes down the legs. Where it's different here is that this is moving in one direction. It's moving from the periphery to like the core. So it's going from the hand. It's only running one direction. It's just going up my arm, around my shoulder, and it's all going to dump into the subclavian vein, the left or the right subclavian vein. So all of this lymphatic system that you see drains fluid from around your body, and it's all headed toward the subclavian vein. So this is the lymphatic system. There's a few organs that are involved as well that we're going to talk about. For example, your thymus sits on top of your heart. You've got a spleen over here, like all the way on the left. You have bone marrow, red bone marrow, found in like long bones, flat bones. And then you have your lymphatic system, which has like, lymphatic vessels, lymphatic nodes. We'll talk about that. So let's talk about what the lymphatic system does first. When we talked about filtration and reabsorption, I was saying that you have more filtration than reabsorption. So you have about 3 liters of extra fluid in your body that you need to get back, because more fluid's going into your interstitial fluid than returning back to your blood. So we can drain. That's one of the functions of the lymphatic system. It's going to take that fluid and bring it back to the subclavian vein. In fact, right here. So here's like here's your capillaries and fluids going out. These are all like your cells, and the white space in between is your interstitial fluid. So all this fluid is going, filtration means that fluid's leaving the capillary and going into the interstitial fluid, but not as much as going back, returning back into the blood. So that excess fluid is going to go into these lymphatic capillaries and travel that way. Here's kind of like a bigger picture of it, right? So there's like these doors that can open up to allow fluid in, but it doesn't let fluid back out. So this is the very beginning of the lymphatic system. This is where it starts. It starts at the lymphatic capillary. It also transports lipids and lipid-soluble vitamins. Those are the 4 lipid-soluble vitamins that you see. But it transports lipids, and it's involved in immune responses. So half of this chapter, more than half, is going to be on immunity. So this chapter actually covers 2 things: the lymphatic system and immunity. Your chapter treats them as one. I sort of break them apart. But the lymphatic system is involved in immune responses. Like the spleen is involved in immunity. The the red bone marrow. The red bone marrow, that's where a lot of your that's where your white blood cells are made, like your T cells and stuff. The thymus is an area where, like, we'll talk about it, but they're all immune system organs. Your thymus is very important for immune reactions. So is your spleen. So is your red bone marrow. So these three functions. So add this question, functions of the lymphatic system. Add that question to your 7-question bank. This is kind of a closer shot of it. So, wait, let me see if I wrote it. No. All right. So how it goes is it'll start with a lymphatic capillary. That's the beginning of it. And then those lymphatic capillaries are going to converge and get bigger. And so they become lymphatic vessels. And then there's these lymph nodes. So let me go to this first picture. There's lymph nodes all around. And so as they're in these lymphatic vessels, the lymph is going to move through these lymph nodes. And lymph nodes are like filters, I guess. There's about 600 lymph nodes in your body. They tend to be clustered. So some are clustered in your neck, axillary region, groin. Those are ones that we can at least touch. Right? And so what they are is they're kind of like alarm systems. Right? If you get something in your body, when it goes through the lymph node's going to like notice that it's a piece of bacteria or something, and it's going to trigger the lymphatics. It's going to trigger the immune system. So lymphatic capillaries, lymphatic vessels, then there's 5 different like lymphatic trunks. So lymphatic capillary, lymphatic vessel, lymphatic trunk, and lastly, the biggest ones are lymphatic duct. So I'm showing you 2 ducts here. There's one on the right side and one on the left side. The one on the right side is right here. I'm following it right here with the arrow. That's it. Just that. That's the right lymphatic duct. You see how it drains into the right subclavian vein. So there it is. Here's the left one. The left one starts it's a lot bigger. It starts all the way down at this thing, this kind of like lump called the cisterna chyli. And then let's just follow it up. It's right here. This is the left, or it's called the thoracic duct, but left lymphatic duct. Right here. Just follow it with like the arrow. There it is. And it's going into the left subclavian vein. So that's where it ends. It starts with a capillary. It ends with a duct. And then there's like these 5 trunks that go into the duct. And they're named, they're pretty easy names. The ones coming down from the neck. So like you see this arrow right here and that arrow right here. So this one right here, this and this. Those are jugular trunks. Those jugular trunks are going to empty into the duct. So jugular because they're coming down the neck where the jugular vein is, right? The ones coming around the shoulder, like these arrows, those are subclavian. Same name as the vein. So you got jugular trunks, subclavian trunks, where the shoulder is. And let's go down here a little bit. Oh, actually, let's go up here. See that arrow? So you've got what's called broncho. It's right here. Broncho mediastinal trunk. Left and right. That's not that important, but a broncho mediastinal trunk. So the mediastinum is the cavity that the heart sits in. Broncho, lungs. So you're talking about the thorax. The broncho mediastinal trunk empties the thorax. So you've got 3 trunks so far: jugular, subclavian, bronchomediastinal. That's the one you're going to have to remember, learn. Down here, you've got intestinal. Intestinal, think about where your intestines are. They're like in your abdomen. It's going to drain the abdomen. And then lastly, lumbar. Lumbar is like the lowest part of the back, right? So the lumbar trunk is going to drain like the legs. So the lumbar and the intestinal are both down here. Like you see this cisterna chyli, this lump here, and you got like 3 things going into it. 1, 2, 3. That's the intestinal and lumbar trunks. So you've got 5 trunks: lumbar, intestinal, bronchomediastinal, subclavian, jugular. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 trunks. So you got 2 ducts, left duct, right duct. You've got 5 different trunks that like empty into it. And then, but I don't mean like 5. I mean there's like a left and there's a right. So, but like 5 areas, and then many lymphatic vessels, and an infinitely greater amount of lymphatic capillaries. So there's a type of circulation here. I'm not sure how, like these types of slides don't necessarily help me, but let's think about, let's kind of follow it through. So let's start with the blood. The blood's leaving the heart. We'll pick the aorta here. The blood's leaving the aorta. And where is it going? It's going everywhere, right? All your arteries. Those arteries are going to become capillaries, right? And then those capillaries, fluid is going to leave those capillaries and not return. So that's where we are here. So here's the aorta. The aorta becomes arteries. The arteries are going to become arterioles, then capillaries. Here's the capillaries. Fluid's going to leave, but not return. The lymphatic capillaries are going to pick it up and become lymphatic vessels, lymphatic trunks, lymphatic ducts, and it's going to dump right back into the blood again at the subclavian vein. So it is kind of like a circle if you're talking about fluid. So because some fluid leaves the capillaries and doesn't go back, we got to get that fluid back to the blood in a different way. So the lymphatic system picks it up, takes it through the body, dumps it back into the subclavian vein. Then it's back in the blood again. But let's leave this slide. All right, let's talk about some of the tissues and organs of the lymphatic system. We can divide it into primary organs and secondary organs. All right, so the primary organs are, as you see here, the red bone marrow and the thymus. The thymus sits on top of the heart. So, if you remember the white blood cells, there was like 5 different white blood cells. We talked about neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, whatever, lymphocytes, right? And if you're taking lab, lymphocytes were the ones with like the round purple nucleus, right? And that's how you're able to identify them. Lymphocytes are actually kind of unique cells amongst those 5 white blood cells. Lymphocytes, a lot of them are going to go to different places in your body and become specialized. And they're going to become T cells or B cells. And T cells and B cells are going to form a large part of our immune system. So T cells are just lymphocytes that are like specialized. B cells are lymphocytes that are specialized. The difference between T and B, T stands for thymus, B stands for bone marrow. So imagine that they're just people that are going to go to like basic training or boot camp. Where is their basic training? It's in different places. The ones you go to for the Marines is different than the ones for the Air Force. Still the military, it's just that they specialize in doing different things, right? So the thymus has its place, that's for T cells. So T cells are going to be made in the red bone marrow. They're lymphocytes. They're made in the red bone marrow. That's where they're born. But they're going to migrate to the thymus. And this is where they're going to get their training to become T cells. B cells are also they're lymphocytes. They're born in the red bone marrow. That happens to be the same place where their basic training's at. So they're going to stay in the red bone marrow. That's where they're going to get like their training. So the red bone marrow and the thymus are what we call primary organs. That's where those lymphocytes are going to become what we call immunocompetent, or we could say it's stem cells. They become immunocompetent. By immunocompetent, I mean B cells and T cells. There's different kinds of T cells, but we'll get to that. So B cells and T cells, those are going to be two important players when we start talking about immunity. Secondary organs are the alarm systems. Like I was telling you about the lymph node, if something doesn't belong in your body, it's going to trigger that alarm system, right? And that's going to be your lymph nodes. So like, a doctor feels like your lymph nodes in your neck, maybe if they get swollen, that's a sign of infection, right? Because that's inside those lymph nodes, you have lots of like T cells and B cells, and you're kind of like triggering the alarm. There's these things called lymphatic nodules. They're just like lymph nodes, except they don't have a capsule around it. It's not like a big deal. And your spleen. So lymph nodes, lymphatic nodules, your spleen, those are where immune responses start. That's one of the ways your body knows that you've been infected with something. Right? So those organs are not about like training, like making B cells and T cells. No, B cells and T cells hang out here. They hang out in your lymph nodes. They hang out in your lymphatic nodules and spleen. And that's going to trigger your immune system. Yeah, so let's talk about, before we get into the immune system, and I'm not going to jump into all of it today, but I will get into a little bit of it. Yeah, let's talk about some of these. So T cells and B cells, we're going to talk about probably not today, but we're going to talk about them next class. So there's two types of T cells actually. They're called T4 and T8. And we'll get into that next class, but so there's T cells, and then there's B cells. So those are lymphocytes. They're like specialized lymphocytes. And then there's these other terms, microbes. Microbe is anything that is small, right? So bacteria that's in your gut, that's a microbe because you can't see it. You got to put it under a microscope, right? Bacteria they can be good, they can be bad, right? So bacteria is a microbe. It doesn't mean it's like harmful to you. It all depends. But a pathogen is something that's going to cause you trouble, right? So in this case, if we're talking about like E. coli or something, like you have E. coli in you, it's just a microbe, right? But someone else's E. coli that gets in your body, that's a pathogen because that's going to do you harm, or a virus or something. Those are pathogens. The pathogens are not necessarily all microscopic. You can kind of see pollen, worms, some parasites like that. They're pathogens, but they're you could see them. Like you could see worms inside someone's body. So pathogens are things that produce disease. But sometimes these words get used interchangeably because when we talk about pathogens, we're mainly talking about viruses or bacteria. You know, the vast majority of infections for people, especially in this country, are going to be viruses or bacteria. But that's not the only thing. There are fungal infections, but they're not typical. Something like thrush is an example of a fungal infection. Kind of, they're kind of opportunistic. Thrush, ringworm, athlete's foot. We've probably heard of those. Those are fungal infections. So sometimes you can get that. Protozoa. We don't really get, well, I think chlamydia is protozoa. So yes, but malaria is like a big protozoan infection that you would get. We don't really get it in this country. So protozoa is another type of pathogen. And then just general parasites. And I use the example of like worms. Like there's two we have in Louisiana. There's like a hookworm, which is not really that common. And then pinworms, which is called like enterobiasis. And they're worms, and sometimes kids will get them by getting the eggs in their fingernails. And then, what they do is like, the worms come out of your like rectum, and then they make kids like want to scratch down there on purpose. And then they scratch it and they get the eggs in their fingers. And then when they go to daycare centers or wherever, they like spread it around to each other. It's not unusual, but that's another type of pathogen, right? So, and then we have this term antigen. So an antigen is just a piece of, it's a piece of the microbe, or it's a piece of the pathogen. So if you get coronavirus, right, what's in you? The virus. Our body doesn't respond to the whole virus, the whole coronavirus. It responds to little pieces of it, little proteins that are on that. And that's the antigen. So when you get the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are a little bit different. They work on like this different idea. But let's talk about like the J&J vaccine, or we could talk about chickenpox vaccine or any other vaccine. Often what they'll do, one of the ways that vaccines can be made is they take the antigens off of the virus or bacteria. They take the antigens off. They'll take the proteins, and that's what they inject into you. So your body's developing an immune response, not to an actual bacteria or virus. It's just using the antigen. It's just using a protein parts, right? Yes, there are viruses that, they weaken them. And that's another way you can weaken and like attenuate a virus and inject that into you. That's a different way to do it, right? But another way is just to take the antigens, right? So it's the antigen that our immune system responds to. The T cells and the B cells are going to, like, how do you know that you've been infected with a virus? It's not by the virus, it's just by the antigen. So they recognize antigens, and that's what they build the army against. You know what it would be like is like you go to war with another country. You don't have time to memorize everyone's face. You don't even really look at you just look at the flag. You go after the flag. What's the flag on the sleeve? Kill everybody with that flag. That's how our body looks at it. And you're like, oh, what if they take the flags off our uniforms? Yeah, we're screwed. We have to figure out something else. It's a really effective, our immune system's really effective, but it's really good at going after like one thing. So if you take the flag off and you put a different flag on, then you got to kind of like start over. But that would be like the antigen, right? It's not the whole person. It's not even the uniform. it's the flag on the shoulder. That would be like the antigen on the cell. And when we look at these pathogens, viruses are very different than the other 4 pathogens here. Because these other 4 pathogens, we call them exogenous, meaning that they attack the cell from the outside. Viruses work different. They're endogenous. They attack the cell from the. Did I write this down anywhere? No. They attack the cell from the inside. So viruses work a little different, right? Often what they'll do, and actually viruses are different here because they're probably not living. And I say the word probably because, like, I don't consider them living, but there's like a debate on it because something that's living is something that's able to replicate, and viruses do replicate, but they can't replicate on their own. All viruses are, they're either DNA or they're RNA, and then there's a protein capsule surrounding it, and that's it. So they'll kind of like come up to your cell, they'll put their RNA into you or their DNA into you, and that DNA has instructions on how to build more of that virus. So it hijacks their DNA, hijacks your DNA, and they get your cells to make more viruses. So they can't survive without a host. They can't survive without something living. Right? You can't take a virus and like put it in a petri dish with like broth. It needs living cells to grow. The rest of these things, you can grow them. Bacteria, you can put bacteria on cheese and it'll grow, right? It'll make more bacteria. Fungus, same thing, more and more, right? Viruses won't work that way. You can't just put it on cheese. They need like living cells. And you're like, well, there's bacteria or whatever. You know what I'm saying, right? So viruses are different. They're much more simple. And they attack your body differently. They attack from the inside. They're like a Trojan horse. All right, I spent enough time on that. All right, thymus. The thymus sits on your heart. It sits on top of your heart. It follows a very similar pattern to the adrenal gland in that you have a capsule. So this pink part's the capsule. You have a cortex, and here it's purple. And then you have a medulla, which is a lighter color. Capsule, cortex, medulla. Your lymph nodes are going to work the same way. Your spleen's going to work the same way. This is your thymus, right? So T cell, and if you look at the thymus, at the cortex here, it's really dark, right? Why is it so dark? If you were to magnify that, well, actually, this is magnified. You see all these lymphocytes, right? It's just filled with lymphocytes, and that's why it's so much darker here. So these are all these lymphocytes. They're calling them T cells here, but they're lymphocytes, right? This is where the lymphocytes are going to become T cells. So they contain T cells. They contain these things called dendritic cells, which we're not going to really talk about today, but they stand for antigen-presenting cells. They're these cells that, it's like there are these cells that like they capture like an opposing soldier and they rip the flag off of the uniform and then they take the flag to all the Marines and they're like see this flag? That's what you want to kill. Right? That's what antigen presenting cells are. They're cells that present the antigen. Don't worry, we'll get to that. And then macrophages, you'll see that word a lot. Macrophages, we also call macrophages phagocytes, right? So it's got this root in it, PHAG, meaning to eat. Phagocytes, macrophages, they're cells that eat things. There's different ways to kill like bacteria. You can eat them, or you can like go up to them and like stab them or shoot them or something, right? So that's how your body looks at things that don't belong, right? There's actually three ways to do it. Right? You can eat them. That's what a macrophage does. A macrophage will eat them. It's not very effective, right? It's going to take a long time to eat an invading army. That's a commitment. We don't have that kind of time. Easier to shoot them, right? So you can eat them, you can stab them. That's what T cells do. They've got this stuff that like punches holes in them, stabs them, they bleed out. Or third, there's like this psychops thing you can do, like a Jedi mind trick. You can talk the cell into killing itself. So if a bacteria infects you, T cells, either they will go and like stab them, or they will like do their Jedi mind trick and talk them into killing themselves. So again, that we'll get to. So T cells, antigen presenting cells, and then macrophages, which are cells that eat. They're in the thymus. I'm not going to ask you about the thymus on the quiz. I'm just kind of showing you, right? Here's a lymph node. And actually, I'm probably going to wrap it up after this, even though we're kind of early here. Here's a lymph node, same idea. Capsule, there's a capsule around the lymph node. Here's the cortex. And then this middle part is the medulla. Same idea. Look inside. If you look inside of here, you find T cells, you find macrophages. We'll talk about these other type of cells later, but you know, your lymph, and if you look at the lymph node, here's the lymph coming in, and the lymph moves through here, and then here's the lymph going out. And you notice how they've got valves to keep everything going in one direction, right? So if you've been infected with something, it could end up in your lymphatic system, and as it moves through the lymph node's going to see it, and that's going to like trigger your immune system. The other trigger, so there's three things that trigger your immune system: lymphatic nodes, lymph nodes, lymphatic nodules. It's like a lymph node. We haven't really gotten to that yet. And then the spleen. So blood, here's the big artery going into the spleen, and the blood diffuses out this way. I mean, I'm sorry. Well, yeah. So as it diffuses out, if anything is, you notice how the middle part here is like all dark blue? We call that white pulp. And then this out here is red pulp. So in the red pulp, what you have there is a lot of red blood cells being eaten, and like they're phagocytized and they're broken up. You know, remember when we were talking about how red blood cells, like talking about like transferrin and ferritin and all the pigments and all that? That's here. That's in this red pulp. The white pulp, which is not actually white, it's like blue, that's filled with lymphocytes, with like T cells and B cells. So as like blood moves through, it's going to trigger the spleen as well. So the spleen is like an alarm system. So is the lymph node. And then you have a third one called lymphatic nodules. They kind of sit underneath your underneath your epithelial tissue. So if you were to look at your like your esophagus, for example, right? The lining of your esophagus is epithelial tissue, epithelial cells. Underneath that layer of cells, you're going to have nodules here and there. In case anything, if you swallow a piece of bacteria and it like grabs onto your esophagus on the way down to the stomach and it tries to burrow through and get into your blood, sometimes these lymphatic nodules will catch them and they're filled with macrophages. So the macrophages will just eat the bacteria. Right? Eating stuff works good for small things. If you eat bacteria that were on your food, if you like touch the button on the elevator and then like you're eating chips, right? You're getting whatever was on that elevator button into your mouth, right? We can use a macrophage for that because it's not like billions and billions of bacteria. It's just like some, right? The problem is, what do you do when someone sneezes on you and like all these bacteria get in you, and then by the next morning you've got like a billion, right? That's a different kind of response. You can't send some macrophages after that to eat them. You need an army, right? Because there is an army in you. Someone sneezed on you yesterday. You've got the army now in you. You need to like stop them before they get even bigger. So you got to make your own army. That's what we're going to talk about next lecture. All right. Here's the third thing: lymphatic nodules. So they're found. The lamina propria is like this layer that's underneath your epithelial tissue. So you find them in any tubes like in your body, right? So you're going to breathe in. You've got like your trachea and bronchioles. What's the lining of your trachea, like your windpipe? It's epithelial tissue. The lining of anything is always going to be epithelial tissue, right? But what's underneath that? Lamina propria. The lining of your esophagus, epithelial tissue. What's underneath that? Lamina propria. Same thing with your urinary tract. Same thing, lamina propria. Right, so that has lymphatic nodules in it. Sometimes look, you don't need to know this for like the test, but they're called sometimes MALT or BALT, mucosa associated lymphatic tissue. So mucosa is like another name for the lining. Like, what's the lining of my esophagus? It's epithelial tissue. And like underneath that is lamina propria. But I could take the whole thing and call it mucosa, like mucus. All right, I think I'm jumping way ahead here. Let's stop here. I mean, definitely. So, what's the stuff from this chapter that I want to add to your quiz? That. I want to add that. So this is question number 8. I hope I recorded. Yeah, I'm recording. All right. This is question 8. Functions of the lymphatic system. That's question number 9. What are the primary and secondary organs of the lymphatic system? I think that's... No. Wait. No. All right. So 9. You've got 9 questions. So there's only 2 questions from all of that I talked about. Oh, not that one. Sorry. That one. That's question 9. That's 8. I'm going to put both lectures up. All right. And so where I'm going on Wednesday after we take the quiz, I'm going to start here, and I'm going to start talking about immunity. The 2 types of immunity, right? General and specific. I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to probably do the whole thing. I'll talk about all the immune system, and I'll finish that up on Wednesday. So, question 9, question 8, and then you've got 7 questions from the chapter on blood vessels. So I'm going to ask probably 5 of those questions. I know there's 9 questions, and I'm only going to pick 5, but I'm going to pick one of these 2 because I can't make it all on so one of those 2 are going to be picked for sure, and then I don't know what else I'm going to pick. But I'll post these 2 lectures. Let me stop recording. We're going to finish up